I'm Cierra Bettens. This is APTN News InFocus. In this edition, we're looking at Indigenous content at the Toronto International Film Festival, also known as TIFF.
My dad, Louis Cameron, he stood up for our people, for the Anicinabe who are suffering in Kenora.
Why do you hold on to this stuff?
I don't know, because it smells like him. It smells like my dad. I don't know.
That was a clip from Red Power Rising, a documentary by Shane Belcourt and Tanya Talaga on the 1974 occupation of Anicinabe Park. It's one of a record-setting 8 Indigenous films from Canada premiering at the 2025 edition of TIFF. Another is Nika and Madison, a feature-length film by Walpole Island First Nation director Eva Thomas following 2 estranged friends brought together by a police encounter.
For another, you did absolutely nothing wrong. It's me that has the problem, not you.
Goose, this is our problem. Either we turn ourselves in together, or we don't. I'm not asking.
So where's your gear?
All 8 of the films were made possible thanks to a $3.5 million investment from the Indigenous Screen Office. Since 2017, the ISO has supported a diversity of Indigenous filmmakers and productions through national funding and advocacy. Melanie Nepinak Hadley is the ISO's VP of Industry Partnerships and Growth. And with 20 years of experience in the industry, she's witnessed a lot of change. Melanie joins us today to share how the film festival landscape has evolved to welcome more Indigenous voices, and the role that the ISO has played in making that a reality. Thanks for joining us, Melanie.
No problem. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so just to start, I was wondering, can you tell us a bit about your time at TIFF?
Yeah, for sure. I am the VP of Industry Growth and Partnerships at the Indigenous Screen Office, and I find that sort of puts me in a bunch of different places within a market like TIFF. Being at TIFF this year was very different for me because in the past I've attended either as a sponsor or a creative executive, and this was the first time sort of attending as a funder. And a completely different experience, a different level of pride, I would say. During TIFF, I do a variety of activities, which include opening remarks for films that we have supported that were selected for the festival. And that's, in front of packed houses of excited moviegoers in Toronto. But then also it includes having meetings with international partners that are in town with their own projects that were selected for TIFF, meeting with potential domestic partners, and also getting FaceTime with people that we have regular connections with, like CMF, the Canada Media Fund, Telefilm, the CMPA, things like that. And then there's always the business of the celebrations. When you have a screening at the festival, there's often a celebration after the screening. We host a brunch to welcome not only the filmmakers that we supported who are Indigenous, but to welcome all Indigenous filmmakers to the festival. This year, I was lucky enough to MC that event. It was one of our best events yet. I think we had a really nice combination of sort of inspiring words from Carrie Swanson, the CEO, as well as a broad representation of entertainment from the Indigenous community in Canada. And then we have our own evening celebration on Monday night, and that's kind of where we get to, I would not say fully cut loose, but I would say cut loose a little bit and really just get to bask sort of in, the team puts a lot of work into it, but we get to sort of bask in the effort. We get to sort of bask in the glow of all the efforts that we've put together leading up to this year's festival.
Mm-hmm. And at this year's festival, a record-breaking 8 Indigenous films from Canada are premiering or have premiered. Can you tell us a bit more about the stories and the people behind these films and, the kind of role that ISO played in making them a reality?
Yeah, it's crazy. ISO invested a combined total of $3.5 million in the development and production of 8 feature films that were selected for this year's program. It really within that 8 is so diverse. We have, we're spotlighting a list of talented emerging voices, as well as award-winning sort of established Indigenous filmmakers. It's a real, I think, testament to the depth of the industry that we have, while also featuring the continued growth of it. So we have those people who are established, like Zacharias Kanuk, whose new film, Week Saring Tara, Wrong Husband, premiered. He's, been around these festivals for years. And then we sort of have people who this was their first time getting a film programmed, like Eva Thomas's Nika and Madison. We're also seeing an interesting representation of films that are impact driven or issues driven, combined with films that are just these kind of human stories through an Indigenous lens, like coming of age, finding your first love, with Gail Maurice's Bloodlines. Like there's just, you're not just seeing, I think, the stories that you think are coming from the Indigenous community. You're actually seeing the film goers had an opportunity just to see really modern Indigenous perspectives at this year's festival.
And so these 8 films were supported by a $3.5 million investment through the ISO's Story Fund. Can you tell us a bit more about the Story Fund and what kind of support it provides filmmakers and these films?
Actually, I want to clarify that the $3.5 million comes not only from our production fund, it comes from our development funding. It also comes from our finishing fund. And it even includes a few of our other investments that we do through sector development, where we do things like Makeshift language initiatives. We might have an apprentice program. The support that ISO gave these films actually runs the gamut of the types of funding we offer for projects in Canada. So it wasn't just a straightforward, these were things we supported in production. We have different sort of lanes of activity that we stimulate the industry, and these films are a representation of tapping into different lanes of what we are doing here, of our funding. So it's really exciting to see that you don't have to come to the ISO just for production or just for development. You can actually come to the ISO and we can still contribute to your project in a different lane, whether that is finishing funds or something like our sector development, where we do special initiatives to continue to deepen and enrich the Indigenous sector of the film and television industry. But I would say outside of that, the ISO, with any of our content funding, we are really looking at not only investing in emerging talent, but we're looking at also continuing to invest in those established storytellers that are realizing global success. And I think that that's really important to say. I think that people think that the ISO might just only be doing capacity building, and we're doing that, but we're also participating in these, for lack of a better term, bigger sort of blockbuster mainstream projects as well.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I think separates the ISO from, other funding agencies is its support for narrative sovereignty. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about what that is and why it's so important.
For us, narrative sovereignty is just Indigenous storytellers being able to control their projects so that they are authentically Indigenous. I think the thing that also makes us unique is that we are the benefactor of public funds, but we are ultimately a private funder. We are ultimately an independent funder, and that really gives us the ability to be nimble and to be community informed. So when we talk about narrative sovereignty, we're talking about the majority ownership being with an Indigenous talent, an Indigenous producer, a Indigenous writer, a director. But then we're also talking about the ongoing conversation that we have with the Indigenous corner of this industry. We include those people in our assessments when we're selecting projects. We have an open dialogue with them throughout the course of their projects. The team does make themselves available to folks who haven't yet applied. And then we are always open to having conversations about what we're doing, how we can be serving them better, which I think is not something you see with the traditional funders. We just have an ability. We have a shorthand with the community, Indigenous community, but we also have the ability to just be more nimble and make changes and change our policies within that we feel will serve them better.
Hmm. And so, going back to the festival and TIFF, I'm wondering, what opportunities do these massive festivals like TIFF give Indigenous filmmakers, in terms of exposure or just launching careers as well?
Well, I think it does exactly both those things. An ISO supported film getting into TIFF not only means that a larger audience is going to see it, but it also gives us that pedigree that we have that is very much a marker of success in the industry. So now if somebody had a film that was selected for TIFF, when they do their next project, that is part of their proposal. That's part of what they bring to the table. And then they may find themselves in scenarios where they can diversify the funding that they're getting. They won't necessarily need, just the ISO or just one of the other funders. They can actually maybe get an international sale. It just cracks open the opportunities for them because being selected for TIFF does go a long way in terms of being a marker of this person has, incredible talent. This person's a good storyteller and those things.
And so you also sit on TIFF's Indigenous Advisory Board, and I'm wondering, what kind of influence has the board had on the festival and its inclusion of Indigenous voices?
I'll be honest with you, that one is really a little bit complicated right now, only because the Indigenous Advisory did take a pause in 2024 as the organization was figuring out how they could use an advisory. I can say, though, from my perspective, now that I've joined the ISO and seeing how someone like Carrie Swanson, the CEO, communicates with them, I would say it's just a general openness from both sides. We want to have a relationship with TIFF where we are a sponsor, where we are putting on events, where we're supporting the Indigenous filmmakers that attend, whether or not they had ISO funding. And from the TIFF side, they have a real desire to be inclusive with the Indigenous community. So I think both of those things have enabled us to have a mutually advantageous partnership.
And you've been in the industry for, I believe, over 2 decades now. And I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about, how has the festival landscape changed for Indigenous filmmakers and productions between, when you're first getting into the industry and now?
I mean, when I first came into the industry, attending TIFF was not what it is now. I would not say we were included in some of those events that occur at TIFF, those different types of celebrations, those different types of gatherings that are not just the film premieres. I remember attending TIFF earlier in my career and really feeling like an outsider, not necessarily seeing Indigenous stories in the programming. And so to go from that to now where we just feel very ingratiated and it feels like our presence is continuing to grow has been really exciting. And I think it's two things. It's that TIFF recognizes the history of Canada and the role that they have to play with the Indigenous community. But also, I think it's that our storytellers, regardless of the acceptance of these mainstream festivals, we've continued to tell our stories. We've continued to grow and develop as a corner of this industry. But I would say even in these last few years, we've had really big growth. So, in 2024, I think we only had 3 features and I think 1 series at the festival. And the year before that, we only had 3 features, no series, nothing else, just 3 features. That was in 2023. So in my career, I saw for such a long time this lack of inclusion to then all of a sudden in these last few years with the creation of the ISO and with the team's continued commitment to raising ISO profile and to being strategic about elevating Indigenous storytellers, now we're seeing this really quick rise. But it's like anything in the entertainment industry, it feels almost like an overnight success when really it's on the backs of 10, 20 years of petitioning, lobbying, taking up space, making our own space within these spaces. I mentioned we have a breakfast where we welcome all Indigenous storytellers. That occurs in TIFF. but I know a version of that existed before we were in the building. We were still welcoming other Indigenous storytellers if they had a film there, or if they were also just coming to the festival to watch films like any other sort of audience member that buys a pass.
And, looking forward, say in the next 5, 10, or even 20 years, how would you like to see the industry further evolve to support Indigenous filmmakers, Indigenous films, Indigenous voices, in the industry and in this festival environment as well?
I mean, I just want to continue to see increased selections from the Indigenous community, whether or not they're ISO films or not, from that global Indigenous community as well. And I would also love to see diversity within the subject matters of those films. We have historically found ourselves telling stories of our traumatic past and our traumatic history. And right now we're at this precipice where we're starting to turn a corner and we're starting just to tell modern Indigenous stories. And I really look forward to a time when we can go to TIFF and, let's say, watch a thriller or watch a romantic comedy, and it be by an Indigenous filmmaker with an Indigenous crew or an Indigenous production company, and people in the audience not go there and attend it for that reason. They go there and attend it because they really just want to see this exciting romantic comedy or this exciting thriller, where we can just tell stories and they become inherently Indigenous because we are the ones owning them. We are the ones controlling the narrative of them. And we're really able to see modern reflections of what Indigenous people are, and that we are having the human experience very similar to non-Indigenous folks. I really look forward to a time that we sort of get to exist in spaces that aren't specifically Indigenous, but that we can still sort of be controlling those projects.
All right, well, that's all the time we have, Melanie, but thank you so much for joining us and sharing your perspective.
No, thank you so much. It's so nice to meet you guys, and thank you for accommodating my schedule. I really, really appreciate it.
Melanie Nepinak Hadley is the Vice President of Industry Partnerships and Growth at the Indigenous Screen Office. You can learn more about the office by visiting iso-bae.ca. The Toronto International Film Festival is on now through September 14th. Today's episode was produced by Mark Blackburn and edited by Jesse Andrushko. Charmaine Straker is the executive producer of APTN News InFocus. If you're liking the show, please leave us a review. If you have any comments or ideas, email them to infocus@aptn.ca. For more APTN News podcasts, visit aptnnews.ca or find us on your favorite player. I'm Cierra Bettens. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next week.
Hi, I'm Dennis Ward, one of the hosts of APTN National News. We've expanded our Truth and Politics panel into a weekly podcast. Each episode, panelists Jennifer Leywitz and Negon Sinclair join us to examine key issues affecting Indigenous peoples across Canada. Listen and subscribe on your favorite podcast player.